It was a night like any other in a quiet town, but for Michael Politte, everything would change in an instant. The screams in the darkness, the smell of smoke filling the air. This was no ordinary night. Inside the trailer where Michael and his family lived, a brutal crime was unfolding. Rita Politte, a mother of 3, would be found lifeless, her body bearing the marks of a violent struggle. Michael was the first to call for help, but soon after, his actions and his words would come under intense scrutiny. As investigators pieced together the details of that fateful night, doubts began to surface. Was Michael, the troubled teen with a history of arguments with his mother, the one responsible for this horrifying act? Or was he, as he claimed, the innocent victim of a tragic and misguided accusation? What happened that night, and what followed in the days, months, and years after, would spark a legal battle that still reverberates today. But was the truth ever truly uncovered? Or has an innocent teenager been wrongfully condemned? Join us as we explore the mystery surrounding Rita Politte's death, the twists in the investigation, and the fight for justice that continues to this day. Michael Politte, born on November 3, 1984, grew up in the quiet rural town of Hopewell, Missouri, about 70 miles southwest of St. Louis. Known to everyone as Bernie, a nickname derived from his middle name Bernard, he was the youngest in the family. His parents, Rita and Edward, had 2 older daughters, Crystal and Melanie, with whom Bernie shared a strong bond. Hopewell was the kind of town where life moved at a slow pace. Residents left doors and windows unlocked, children rode bikes freely, and evenings were spent playing outdoors without a worry. Rita and Edward married young, starting their family as teenagers. However, their marriage faced challenges early on, marked by frequent arguments that escalated over time into domestic violence. Both parents were involved, and the children were often witnesses to these painful scenes. Bernie had a special connection with his mother, Rita, who supported him passionately in his childhood. She attended all his school events, recording his achievements in baseball and football with her video camera. Despite the love and care, the constant discord at home took a toll on Bernie. As he grew older, the once cheerful boy became withdrawn and troubled. By adolescence, he was struggling with anger issues, skipping school, and even failing 7th grade multiple times. The tension at home reached a breaking point in 1997 when a violent altercation occurred between Rita and Edward. During a late-night argument, Edward assaulted Rita, and Bernie, just 13 at the time, witnessed the horrifying event. By early 1998, the strain in the family had deeply affected Bernie, leading to a heated argument with his mother. In a fit of rage, he threatened both her life and his own. This intense confrontation resulted in Bernie being hospitalized. After this incident, something shifted for Rita. Realizing the impact of their toxic marriage on her children, she filed for divorce in the summer of 1998 after over 2 decades of marriage. The divorce was contentious, but Rita managed to secure the family trailer and a portion of Edward's pension as child support. Bernie's relationship with his mother began to heal, and they grew close once more, even as he navigated the complexities of splitting time between his parents due to joint custody. On December 4, 1998, Rita, then 40, had just finalized her divorce 4 days earlier. That evening, she worked a shift at a local bar and stayed out briefly to celebrate with friends. Meanwhile, Bernie, now 14, decided to ride his bike to the general store to pass the time. Along the way, he ran into his friend, 15-year-old Josh, and invited him over for a sleepover, a common occurrence in their small community. The boys spent the evening playing chess and video games at the Politte family trailer. Later, they wandered to the nearby railroad tracks to light a bonfire, a typical pastime for kids in the area. Rita returned home around 11 p.m., bringing sandwiches for the boys. She wished her son good night and asked him not to stay up too late. Despite her suggestion, Bernie and Josh weren't ready for sleep just yet. They decided to extend their evening with some music and a little marijuana, enjoying their carefree time together. When they finally decided to call it a night, Michael climbed into his bed while Josh set up a makeshift bed on the floor. Though they tried to sleep, they ended up whispering and laughing about random things, careful not to wake Rita. The next morning, around 6:30 a.m., they were jolted awake by an overwhelming, acrid smell. Michael noticed the room was filled with a hazy white smoke, similar to what you might see when something burned on a stove. Curious and concerned, he got up to investigate. But when he opened the bedroom door, he was met with a dense wall of smoke. Panicked, he called out for his mom, but there was no response. Realizing something was seriously wrong, Michael bolted outside, grabbed the garden hose, and ran back in. Seeing Rita's car in the driveway, he knew she was still home. His first instinct was to rush to her bedroom. But instead of finding her unconscious from the smoke, he was confronted with a horrifying sight. His mother's body was on fire, her upper torso engulfed in flames, and blood streaked down her legs. Frozen with shock, Michael fell to his knees, unsure of what to do. Desperately, he tried to extinguish the flames, but the hose didn't reach her room. The smell of burning flesh and the sound of the crackling fire burned into Michael's memory, haunting him long after that terrible morning. Meanwhile, Josh ran out to get help, and neighbors, hearing the commotion, called the police and fire department. When first responders arrived, they described the scene as something out of a nightmare. The house reeked of smoke and charred remains. After extinguishing the fire, investigators immediately realized this wasn't just a tragic accident. Rita had suffered brutal injuries inflicted with a blunt object, primarily to her head and upper body. Blood spattered the floor, walls, and furniture, painting a grim picture of a violent struggle. The fire chief confirmed that an accelerant had been used to set her body ablaze, but no other clues were found. No murder weapon, no signs of forced entry, and no forensic evidence pointing to a suspect. Michael, overwhelmed with grief, called his sisters to tell them that someone had broken into their home and killed their mother. Both sisters rushed to the scene and found their brother sitting in a police car, his face smeared with soot and tears. His grief was palpable but expressed through quiet withdrawal rather than hysterics. Despite Michael's trauma, both he and Josh were taken to the sheriff's office for questioning. They were transported in separate vehicles to prevent them from aligning their stories. Officers observed Michael's behavior closely, noting that he seemed detached. At one point, he asked what would happen to his mom's car, a comment they found odd and suspicious. This remark, combined with his calm demeanor, led some investigators to suspect him of involvement in his mother's death. Michael was subjected to a voice stress test, a controversial tool often dismissed as unreliable in court. When he failed, it only deepened the officer's suspicions. The investigators scrutinized his behavior, deeming it inappropriate for someone who had just found their mother dead and burning. The boy's clothing and shoes were confiscated for analysis. He explained in detail how he and Josh had spent the previous day, riding bikes, playing video games, and later lighting a small fire at the railroad tracks near his house using gasoline. Investigators confirmed this story when they found evidence of a recent fire in the described area. Despite finding no blood or signs of struggle on Michael's clothes or shoes, forensic analysis detected traces of a chemical substance on his shoes, possibly linked to the accelerant used in the fire. This discovery, paired with Michael's turbulent relationship with his mother and his history of aggressive outbursts, cast a dark shadow over him. For days, Michael and Josh were interrogated separately. Each session stretched for hours, but Michael's account remained consistent. Josh corroborated his friend's story, providing no evidence to suggest Michael's involvement in the murder. Yet, the combination of circumstantial evidence, Michael's history of anger, and the lingering scent of suspicion from investigators continued to shape the trajectory of the case. Investigators became convinced that Michael Politte was responsible for his mother's death, basing their belief on the presence of accelerant on his shoes and his perceived lack of emotional response after the tragedy. They theorized that Michael had orchestrated the crime and invited his friend Josh as an alibi. Their relentless questioning eventually yielded a breakthrough. 2 days after the incident, Josh made a statement that significantly weakened Michael's defense. He claimed that during the night, he woke up to noises and screams only to realize that Michael was no longer in the room. This statement was recorded on video and later became pivotal in the case. However, Josh later confided in his mother that he had been subjected to intense interrogation tactics. He admitted he felt confused, unsure of what was real and what wasn't. The police had suggested he might be lying or even implicated him in the crime, leaving the teenager terrified. Despite both boys denying any involvement, Josh's recorded statement was enough for authorities to act. Michael Politte was arrested 2 days after the crime, accused of murdering his mother. Josh's words undermined Michael's claim that he and Josh had been together all night and woke up simultaneously at 6:30 a.m. to the smell of smoke. Michael's family, including his sisters and his father Edward, were shocked by the arrest. While they acknowledged Michael's temper, the idea that the 14-year-old could brutally kill his mother and set her body on fire was inconceivable. His loved ones were convinced a mistake had been made and hoped the truth would eventually come to light. However, Michael remained in custody for 3 years awaiting trial. During this time, prosecutors offered Michael a plea deal: plead guilty to intentional homicide and receive a sentence of no more than 15 years in prison, avoiding a potential life sentence. Michael refused, steadfastly maintaining his innocence. He insisted he could never harm his mother, the person he was closest to in the world. His decision meant the case would go to trial. The trial began in January 2002, with Michael now 17 years old. Represented by a public defender with minimal legal experience, Michael faced a challenging battle. The prosecution built its case around circumstantial evidence, including the accelerant traces found on Michael's shoes. Investigators argued that the accelerant matched both the fire Michael and Josh had lit for fun at the railroad tracks and the one that consumed the Politte family home. A witness also testified that weeks before the tragedy, they had seen Michael on the porch angrily flicking a lighter after an argument with his mother, implying a potential threat. Josh did not testify at the trial, nor was the jury shown the video of his interrogation where he stated Michael wasn't in the room that night. Instead, the jury was informed that Josh had been granted immunity, suggesting he had provided valuable information. This raised questions, but his absence as a witness remained unexplained. The prosecution also brought forward 3 juvenile detention staff members who claimed Michael had confessed to killing his mother. They testified that Michael had shouted during a suicide attempt that he didn't care because he had already taken his mother's life. These accounts were noted in their reports and presented as evidence in court. Michael's defense team argued there was no direct evidence tying him to the crime scene. However, they struggled to counter the prosecution's narrative effectively. The attorney chose not to have Michael testify, citing a lack of preparation time, which left Michael unable to personally refute the claims against him. Ultimately, the prosecution's combination of circumstantial evidence, witness statements, and testimony from the detention center staff proved persuasive. Michael's insistence on his innocence was overshadowed by the allegations and the doubts sown by the prosecution's case. Despite the brutal nature of the crime, there were no physical injuries on Michael Politte's body, nor was there any blood on his clothes. The accelerant found on his shoes was likely a result of the fire he and his friend Josh had set on the railroad tracks for fun, which the prosecution used to cast suspicion on him. Unfortunately, this was the extent of Michael's defense during the trial. His attorney did not call any witnesses to testify on Michael's behalf, not even his sisters, who knew him well and could have spoken to his character. The defense primarily relied on the fact that no murder weapon was found at the scene, and there was no direct physical evidence linking Michael to the crime. There was no blood or injuries on his body despite the clear evidence of a violent struggle between the victim, Rita, and her attacker. The defense also pointed out that no other potential suspects were considered, even though there were individuals who could have had motives. However, investigators and the public focused solely on Michael, a troubled teenager with a history of arguments with his mother. After just 3 days of testimony, the jury deliberated for only 4 hours before delivering a guilty verdict. Michael Politte was convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. He was sent to Missouri State Prison, which was notorious for its violence and brutality, earning the nickname the bloodiest 47 acres in America. Inside, Michael became the target of constant attacks by other inmates. In order to protect himself, he joined a gang, becoming a skinhead. He also turned to illegal substances to cope with the trauma of his conviction and the harsh conditions of prison life. Meanwhile, his father, Edward Politte, tried to help by hiring an attorney to file an appeal. However, after considerable effort and expense, the appeal was ultimately rejected. Edward later claimed that the lawyers he hired were ignoring him and not responding to calls or emails. In a desperate attempt to force action, Edward threatened to file a complaint against them, but it was later revealed that he hadn't actually contacted the attorneys at all. This betrayal devastated Michael, who was already struggling in prison. The rift between father and son became irreparable, and Michael refused to speak to his father again. 5 years after his conviction, Michael reached out to a non-profit organization that worked on cases of wrongful conviction. They agreed to take on his case, and with their support, Michael turned his life around. He stopped using drugs and began focusing on the possibility of proving his innocence. The non-profit organization worked tirelessly to investigate the details of Rita Politte's tragic death, and after 10 years of careful research, a new legal team joined the effort. The new defense team meticulously examined all the evidence and believed that Michael had been convicted simply because he was an easy target, a vulnerable teenager who had no one to defend him. The loss of his mother had marked the beginning of his downward spiral, but now, with a committed legal team behind him, Michael's case was about to take a significant turn. The prosecution's case was based on several key points, including the claim that an accelerant had been used to start the fire. However, the fire chief's testimony was revealed to be based on mere speculation, as no laboratory tests had been conducted to verify the presence of any accelerants. When the lab did test Michael's shoes, they found no trace of accelerant. Instead, the substance found on his shoes was determined to be a chemical used in shoe manufacturing, which had been mistaken for gasoline. The Missouri State Crime Lab agreed with this conclusion, stating that the solvents used in shoe adhesives bore similarities to gasoline, a fact that was not widely known in the late 90s. Additionally, the prosecution relied on testimony from 3 witnesses who claimed to have heard Michael confess to killing his mother. However, Michael insisted that what he actually said was that he didn't care because someone else had taken his mother's life. At the time, Michael was severely stressed and contemplating suicide, and his statement was misunderstood by the witnesses. One of Michael's attorneys later pointed out that, just as we talk about tunnel vision, people can hear what they want to hear. The police had documented a violent struggle, with blood spattered across walls and furniture, but Michael showed no signs of injury. How could a 14-year-old commit such a brutal crime without leaving a trace? It seemed impossible, yet this was the evidence used to convict him. Experts, law enforcement officials, and lawyers now agree that the case against Michael was built on fabricated evidence, with a flawed investigation and an inadequate defense team. His lawyers worked tirelessly to unravel the truth, and eventually the justice system started to shift in his favor. In 2021, a law was passed in Missouri allowing juvenile offenders convicted of serious crimes a chance at parole. Michael, who had served a life sentence, fell under this law. On April 22, 2022, after 24 years behind bars, 38-year-old Michael Politte was released on parole. His sisters, along with other family and friends who had believed in his innocence all along, were there to greet him. Michael, who had spent almost his entire life in prison, was now faced with the daunting task of rebuilding his life. He moved in with one of his sisters, obtained a driver's license, and found work as a carpenter, but his criminal record still marked him as someone who had taken his own mother's life. Michael's primary goal now is to clear his name and seek justice for his mother, Rita. He filed a petition to overturn his conviction and requested a retrial, but the Missouri Supreme Court rejected both. However, hope is not lost. The local sheriff's department announced that they had reopened Rita Politte's case, although no further information about the investigation has been released yet. As part of Michael's legal team's renewed efforts, they presented new court documents naming alternative suspects, one of whom is Michael's father, Edward Politte. Despite having an alibi, Edward had a clear motive. Just days before Rita's death, the divorce proceedings concluded, and Rita was granted financial compensation, including child support and the family trailer. Witnesses recalled that Edward had lost his temper in the courtroom, threatening that Rita wouldn't live to see the money she was awarded. His anger over the financial settlement seemed to have sparked his fury. Although Edward's alibi placed him 86 miles away at the time of the crime, it is possible that he had an accomplice, potentially his cousin, Michael's uncle Johnny. Investigators later discovered that Johnny had been near Rita's trailer at the time of the attack. Several people reported seeing him walking along the railroad tracks through the woods, just as emergency vehicles were approaching. Johnny's suspicious behavior didn't end there. He was seen at neighbors' homes shortly after the attack, asking about the incident as if conducting his own investigation. Johnny's involvement in the case deepened when he brought a crowbar to the police station, claiming to have found it in Michael's closet. The police were skeptical since they had already thoroughly searched Michael's room, but Johnny insisted the crowbar had been hidden deep in the closet. Tests later revealed that the crowbar wasn't the murder weapon, and it appeared Johnny had attempted to frame. A stunning photo appears on screen. A beautiful couple at a luxury hotel by Lake Lucerne, Switzerland. She's smiling radiantly. He has his arm around her. The caption reads, "Romantic getaway with my love." Comments flooding in. "Couple goals. You two are perfect. So jealous." But here's what that photo didn't show. On the way to that hotel, he told her he couldn't wait to start a fight so he could go home. During dinner, he insulted other couples at the restaurant. When she asked him to stop, he exploded, told her she would never tell him what to say, and abandoned her alone at the hotel. That perfect photo? It was taken the next morning after she spent the night crying alone. This is the story of Kristina Joksimovic, a woman who spent her career teaching other women to project confidence on the runway, while behind closed doors, she lived in terror. A story of red flags that everyone missed. A story that proves that what we see on social media is often the biggest lie of all, and a story that ended in the most horrific way imaginable on February 13th, 2024, in a quiet Swiss suburb. Are you ready for the darkest stories Britain has to offer? Introducing our new book, Unreal True Crime, British edition. 35 shocking true murder cases that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Available now on Amazon in paperback and Kindle, or grab your instant PDF download from our website. Links are in the description below. Don't miss out. Get your copy today. And now, let's continue with today's case. Scroll through Kristina Joksimovic's social media, and you'd see a woman who had it all. A former Miss Switzerland finalist, a successful catwalk coach who had trained beauty queens, including Dominique Rinderknecht for Miss Universe 2013, a Google recruiter, a mother of 2 beautiful daughters, a wife living in a gorgeous home in Binningen, Switzerland. Born on April 15, 1985, in Basel, Switzerland, Kristina was a woman of Serbian roots with striking beauty and unstoppable ambition. By 22, she had competed in the Miss Switzerland pageant. By her 30s, she had built a career that spanned 2 worlds, the glamour of fashion and the corporate prestige of tech recruitment. She founded Catwalk Coach, her own modeling agency, and spent years teaching young women the secrets of the runway, how to walk with power, how to command attention, how to project confidence even when you don't feel it. Those who knew her described her as energetic, ambitious, and deeply committed to empowering other women. The tragic irony? The woman who taught others to stand tall and project strength was herself shrinking smaller and smaller inside her own home. The woman who coached beauty queens to own the stage couldn't find the courage to leave a man who was slowly destroying her. Abusers often target successful, confident women. Why? Because breaking them down gives them a greater sense of power and control. If you notice someone who was once outgoing becoming increasingly withdrawn, pay attention. Kristina slowly stopped sharing her real struggles with friends and family. On social media, everything looked perfect. In reality, she was being isolated. Kristina's husband appeared to be everything a woman could want.
He came from a wealthy, influential Swiss family. He was a successful entrepreneur who owned a consulting firm. On his LinkedIn profile, he proudly described himself as a father of two daughters. He even volunteered to lead a local scout group. To the outside world, he was the ideal family man. The couple married in August 2017. They welcomed their first daughter in 2020 and their second in 2021. Friends who visited their beautiful home in Binningen saw what looked like a fairy tale, a power couple with adorable children and a picture-perfect life. But Christina's family had sensed something was wrong from the very beginning. They noticed that while Christina was extroverted, always smiling and full of life, her partner was different. He was introverted, often critical, and came across as arrogant. He seemed to look down on others. But Christina was in love, and she believed she could make it work. Psychologists call this the public persona versus private reality split. Many abusers are masters at impression management. They're charming, successful, and well-liked in public. But at home, they're controlling, critical, and cruel. Friends and family often can't believe someone so nice could be abusive. That's exactly what the abuser counts on. To understand what happened to Christina, we need to understand a pattern of abuse that often goes unrecognized: coercive control. Unlike physical violence, which leaves visible marks, coercive control is psychological warfare. It's a pattern of behavior designed to dominate, isolate, and terrorize a partner. After Christina's death, her husband underwent a psychiatric evaluation. The results were chilling. Experts found that he displayed sadistic and sociopathic traits. He had a low capacity for empathy and emotional intelligence. He was capable of acting with cold calculation. He showed low tolerance for frustration and poor impulse control, characteristics commonly found in violent criminals. But here's what makes coercive controllers so dangerous. They're often highly intelligent and skilled at manipulation. Christina's husband knew exactly how to present himself to the world. He crafted an image of the perfect father, the successful businessman, the community volunteer. Meanwhile, at home, he was systematically breaking down his wife. The tactics of coercive control include isolation, cutting the victim off from friends and family. Christina slowly stopped confiding in people about her real situation. Monitoring and surveillance, controlling where the victim goes, who they see, what they wear. Friends noted he was obsessed with controlling their daughter's activities and appearances. Degradation, humiliating the victim, making them feel worthless. The incident at the Lake Lucerne Hotel, where he publicly insulted others and then abandoned Christina, was textbook degradation. Threats, making the victim afraid of what will happen if they disobey or leave. After Christina called the police in July 2023, he told her, "If you call the police, you'll see what happens to you." When a victim finally takes action, calling police, telling family, seeing a lawyer, the abuser often escalates threats. This is one of the most dangerous periods. Christina was threatened after calling authorities. This should have been a major warning sign of potential lethal violence. What makes this case even more tragic is that Christina's husband had a documented history of violence against intimate partners, a pattern that existed long before he ever met her. During the investigation, an ex-girlfriend came forward to testify. Her account was harrowing. She revealed that he had been violent with her multiple times during their relationship. On one occasion, he ran over her foot with his car and then threatened to throw her out of the moving vehicle. On another, he grabbed her by the hair and smashed her head against the dashboard of his car. She said she only managed to escape the relationship in April 2016, just over a year before he married Christina. This testimony revealed a crucial truth. The violence wasn't new. It wasn't something that snapped in him. It was a pattern that Christina walked into without knowing. Research consistently shows that domestic abusers rarely abuse just one partner. If someone has been violent in past relationships, they are highly likely to be violent again. This is why knowing a partner's history matters. Friends and family who know about past violence have a responsibility to warn. Throughout 2023, Christina continued posting beautiful family photos on Instagram, vacations, smiling children, cozy family moments. To her followers, nothing seemed wrong. But in private, Christina was slowly opening up. She told friends that after the birth of their children, her relationship had deteriorated significantly. She confided that her husband had become distant, withdrawn, and unreachable emotionally. She mentioned he had started using substances, alcohol, and she had caught him twice smoking marijuana in the basement. On July 14, 2023, the facade cracked publicly for the first time. Police were called to their home following a domestic violence incident. During this confrontation, according to testimony, Christina's husband grabbed her by the throat and slammed her head against a wall. This was strangulation, one of the most significant predictors of future lethal violence in domestic abuse cases. The couple attempted therapy, but he didn't take it seriously. He would leave sessions early or simply not show up. By this point, Christina had consulted a divorce lawyer. Her friends warned her to be extremely careful given his violent behavior and his family's wealth and influence. Studies show that victims who have been strangled by their partner are 750% more likely to be killed by that partner. Strangulation is not just violence. It is a predictor of homicide. If someone you know has been strangled by a partner, they are in extreme danger. This should trigger immediate intervention. When an abuser begins using substances, the risk of severe violence increases dramatically. Alcohol and drugs lower inhibitions and impair judgment, making lethal violence more likely. Christina noticed this change but didn't realize how much more dangerous it made her situation. There's a tragic truth that domestic violence experts know all too well. The most dangerous time for an abuse victim is when they try to leave. Statistics show that the risk of homicide increases by 75% when a victim attempts to leave their abuser. By early 2024, Christina was at this critical juncture. She had consulted a lawyer about divorce. She had called the police after being assaulted. She was making plans to escape. For a coercive controller like her husband, this represented the ultimate loss of control, something his personality could not tolerate. According to friends, her husband was obsessed with appearances and the image of having a perfect family. He treated his daughters like a project, controlling their activities and clothing. His LinkedIn profile proudly declared him a father. A divorce would shatter this carefully constructed facade. It would expose him as a failure. And for someone with narcissistic and sociopathic traits, that exposure is unbearable. When an abuser is more concerned with how they appear to others than with the well-being of their family, it's a danger sign. If someone views their spouse and children as possessions or extensions of themselves rather than as individuals, they may become violent when that image is threatened. In February 2024, Christina's parents noticed something alarming. They couldn't reach their daughter. For days, there was no response to calls or messages. This was completely out of character. Christina had always been extremely close to her family, maintaining constant contact with them. Then came a call from the preschool. Christina hadn't picked up her daughters. When her father contacted his son-in-law, the response was disturbingly casual. He claimed that Christina sometimes disappeared without a word, leaving the house without saying where she was going. He suggested this was just another one of her temporary vanishing acts. But her family knew this was a lie. This had never happened before. What frustrated them even more was his apparent indifference. His wife was missing, and he seemed unbothered. He simply took care of the children and insisted everything was normal. When someone's spouse goes missing and they show no concern, alarm bells should ring. A normal person would be frantic. They would call hospitals, friends, police. The absence of this expected emotional response is a major indicator that something is very wrong. On February 13th, 2024, Christina's father visited the family home once more. He spent hours there, having lunch with his granddaughters while his son-in-law continued to insist he had no idea where Christina was. Before leaving, something drew him to the shed near the house. Perhaps it was instinct. Perhaps it was desperation. In a corner, he found a garbage bag. When he looked inside, his world collapsed. He had found the remains of his beloved daughter. Screaming in horror, he ran into the street, stopped the first car that passed, and called police. Shortly after 8:30 p.m., officers from Binningen responded to the call. They found a person dead in the residence, suspected of violent crime, and arrested the husband at the scene. What investigators uncovered over the following months revealed the full extent of the horror. According to Swiss media reports based on court proceedings, Christina had been strangled, the same method her husband had used when he attacked her in July 2023. But the crime didn't end with her death. Prosecutors would later charge him with disturbing the peace of the dead, a legal term for the desecration of a corpse. Her body had been dismembered, and attempts had been made to dispose of the remains. The prosecution argued that the methods he chose and the tools he used revealed premeditation and deep hatred. One detail from the investigation stands out as particularly disturbing. While allegedly trying to cover up his crime, investigators found that he had been watching YouTube videos on his phone. This wasn't the behavior of someone in shock or experiencing a breakdown, as he would later claim. It was the behavior of someone calmly passing time while methodically destroying evidence. His story changed multiple times. First, he claimed he had simply found her and panicked. Then he claimed self-defense, an assertion that forensic evidence completely contradicted. In March 2024, during a crime scene reconstruction, he admitted to killing her while still maintaining the self-defense claim. Investigators also discovered that he had purchased specific tools before the crime. He claimed they were for his scout group, but prosecutors believe they were part of a premeditated plan. The psychiatric evaluation of Christina's husband painted a clinical picture of a dangerous personality. Experts identified sadistic and sociopathic traits, a combination that helps explain both the violence and the calculated way he tried to cover it up. What does this mean in practical terms? Sadistic traits indicate someone who derives satisfaction from the suffering of others. This explains the prolonged nature of Christina's abuse, the humiliation, the control, the terror. For him, her fear was gratifying. Sociopathic traits indicate a lack of empathy, remorse, or genuine emotional connection. This explains how he could kill the mother of his children and then calmly watch YouTube videos while disposing of her body. It explains how he could have lunch with his father-in-law while his wife's remains were in the shed outside. Low frustration tolerance combined with poor impulse control meant that when Christina began taking steps to leave, consulting a lawyer, calling police, his response was explosive violence rather than acceptance. The prosecution argued that these psychological characteristics, combined with the methods and effort required to commit the crime and its aftermath, demonstrated profound hatred and premeditation. The conclusion was stark. He was a danger to everyone around him, including his own children. On December 10, 2025, the Basel-Landschaft Public Prosecutor's Office announced that it had completed its investigation and filed formal charges. The now 43-year-old suspect faces 2 charges: murder under Article 112 of the Swiss Criminal Code, which requires particularly unscrupulous conduct and carries a penalty of life imprisonment or not less than 10 years, and disturbing the peace of the dead under Article 262, punishable by up to 3 years. In September 2024, the Swiss Federal Supreme Court denied his request for release pending trial, citing the severity of the allegations and indications of mental illness. He remains in security detention. His defense attorneys have indicated they will seek a verdict of not guilty by reason of mental illness. Under Swiss law, this could significantly reduce his sentence. There is concern that given his family's wealth and influence and his manipulative abilities, he could potentially secure early release for good behavior. As of this recording, no trial date has been set. The true victims of this tragedy extend beyond Christina herself. Her 2 daughters, just 4 and 3 years old at the time, lost everything. Their mother was murdered. Their father went to prison. They had to leave their home and move in with their maternal grandparents. Child psychologists have been working with the girls since their mother's death. On the day of Christina's funeral, they told the children that their mother was sleeping and wouldn't come back. As they grow older, they will eventually learn the truth, that their father killed their mother. It's a burden no child should ever have to carry. Christina's friends have expressed profound guilt. They wonder if they could have done more. They remember her confessions, her calls for help that they didn't fully understand at the time. They wish they had pushed harder, intervened more forcefully, helped her escape before it was too late. Christina Joksimovich's story is not just a crime to be analyzed. It's a warning. It's a lesson in the red flags that, in hindsight, were there all along. Let's review what we learned. Red flag number 1, gradual isolation from friends and family. Red flag number 2, a charming public persona that hides private cruelty. Red flag number 3, threats after the victim takes protective action. Red flag number 4, a history of violence with past partners. Red flag number 5, strangulation, the single greatest predictor of future homicide. Red flag number 6, escalating substance abuse. Red flag number 7, obsession with image and control over family members. Red flag number 8, abnormal emotional responses to crisis situations. If you recognize any of these signs in your own relationship or in someone you love, please take action. Don't wait. Don't assume it will get better. Don't believe the Instagram photos. The most dangerous time is when a victim tries to leave, but staying is not safer. It just delays the inevitable escalation. Christina Joksimovich spent her career teaching women to walk with confidence, to own their power, to command attention. In the end, she couldn't save herself from a man who was determined to destroy her. But perhaps her story can save someone else. Now that you know all the details of this case, I want to hear from you. Do you believe the Swiss justice system will deliver a sentence that truly reflects the horror of what happened? Or do you fear that wealth, influence, and manipulation will once again allow an abuser to escape full accountability? And more importantly, did you recognize any of these red flags? Have you seen them in your own life or in someone you care about? Leave your thoughts in the comments. Let's talk about this, because conversations like this can save lives. Again, I remind you to subscribe and leave a like to let me know that my work is to your liking. Good night. Until next time. "11:10 in the morning. Gracie Piscopo picks up her phone and calls her partner, Andre. No answer. She calls again. Nothing. Again. Voicemail. She sends a text. No response. 11:15. She calls again, and again, and again. Between 11:10 and 11:35 on May 25, 2020, Gracie called Andre more than 12 times. 12 desperate calls. 25 minutes of complete silence. One voicemail that contained nothing but 3 seconds of dead air. Where was Andre Rebelo during those 25 minutes? What was he doing that he couldn't answer a single call, couldn't type a single response? The answer to that question would take investigators 2 years to uncover, and when they did, it revealed one of Australia's most chilling cases of family betrayal. This is the story of Andre Rebelo. Are you ready for the darkest stories Britain has to offer? Introducing our new book, Unreal True Crime, British edition. 35 shocking true murder cases that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Available now on Amazon in paperback and Kindle, or grab your instant PDF download from our website. Links are in the description below. Don't miss out. Get your copy today. And now, let's continue with today's case. If you had scrolled through Andre Rebelo's social media in May 2020, you would have seen what appeared to be a young man living the Australian dream. 28 years old, handsome, with a beautiful influencer girlfriend named Gracie Piscopo and an adorable young child. The photos showed luxury, designer watches catching the sunlight, exotic vacation destinations that most people only see in magazines, expensive restaurants, a lifestyle that screams success, wealth, and happiness. Andre described himself as a crypto investor, someone who had cracked the code of making money work for him. His girlfriend Gracie had tens of thousands of followers. Together, they were the perfect social media couple, the kind that makes you stop scrolling and wonder, how do they afford that life? But behind every filter, behind every perfectly posed photograph, there was a very different reality. The crypto investor? His total profit from cryptocurrency trading was $22, not $22,000. $22. That wouldn't even cover a nice dinner for two. The successful entrepreneur? He was actually a delivery driver, spending his days navigating Perth's streets while his Instagram told stories of boardrooms and business deals. The wealthy lifestyle? It was funded entirely by debt. Over 100,000 Australian dollars in debt, to be precise. Creditors calling constantly, bills piling up, credit cards maxed out. The gap between Andre's Instagram life and his real life wasn't just a crack, it was a canyon. And that canyon was getting wider every single day. Prosecutor Brett Tucker would later describe Andre's existence with one devastating word: plastic. Everything about his public image was fake, manufactured, a carefully constructed illusion designed to hide a desperate man drowning in debt while pretending to swim in success. Think about what that means for a moment. Every time Andre posted a photo of an expensive watch, he was probably thinking about the credit card bill it would add to. Every vacation picture was another debt he couldn't pay. Every luxury dinner was money he didn't have. The likes and comments rolled in from followers who had no idea they were admiring a house of cards. And here's the thing about maintaining a fake life. It costs real money. Money that Andre simply didn't have. The pressure to keep posting, keep performing, keep the illusion alive was constant and relentless. Creditors were calling his phone while he was taking selfies. Bills were piling up while he was editing photos. The gap between who Andre pretended to be and who he actually was grew wider every single day. He needed a solution, a big one that would make over $100,000 in debt disappear and fund his fake lifestyle for years to come. And that's when Andre started looking at his own mother in a very different way. While Andre was busy curating his fake life online, there was one person who had always been there for him with real, unconditional love. His mother, Colleen Rebelo. 58 years old, living in Bicton, a quiet suburb of Perth, Colleen was everything her son pretended to be but wasn't. Genuine, reliable, honest, and truly successful at the things that actually matter in life. She was the kind of mother who never missed a commitment, who never broke a promise, who never let her children down. Her youngest son, Fabian, still lived with her, and every single day, without exception, she would drive him to work in the morning and pick him up at exactly 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Rain or shine. No excuses. If Colleen said she would be somewhere, she would be there. That's just who she was. Unlike her eldest son, Colleen didn't need to fake anything. She didn't need filters or curated posts. Her life was real. Her love was real. And her reliability was something her family could always count on. She was the opposite of everything Andre had become. But in Andre's twisted calculation, his mother had a different kind of value. Not the value of her love, her support, her years of sacrifice. Number? Andre saw a number. 1.15 million Australian dollars to be exact. That's how much 3 life insurance policies would pay out upon her death. And in the week before May 25, 2020, just 7 short days, Andre took out all 3 of those policies on his mother's life. He named himself as the sole beneficiary of each one. Not his brother Fabian, who actually lived with their mother and depended on her. Not anyone else in the family. Just Andre. Every single dollar would go directly to him. $1.15 million. Enough to pay off all his debts with money to spare. Enough to fund his fake lifestyle for years to come. Enough to make the Instagram fantasy actually real, at least for a while. His mother had become nothing more than a number in a spreadsheet, a solution to a financial problem, a way to keep the likes coming. The woman who raised him, who loved him unconditionally, who had sacrificed for him his entire life, was now worth more to Andre dead than alive. And he had exactly 7 days to make that happen before questions might be asked about why a young man had suddenly taken out such massive insurance policies on his healthy middle-aged mother. The morning began like any other. Colleen Rebelo woke up, had her coffee, and drove her youngest son Fabian to work. She dropped him off around 10 o'clock with a simple goodbye. She would pick him up at 2, just like always, just like every other day. Fabian had no reason to think this day would be any different. His mother was reliable. She was always there. He watched her car pull away and went inside to start his shift. It was the last time he would ever see his mother alive. At 11:10 in the morning, Gracie Piscopo tried to call Andre. The phone rang and rang before going to voicemail. Strange, but not alarming. Maybe he was busy. She waited a few minutes and called again. Voicemail. She sent a text message. No response. By 11:15, she had called multiple times. Nothing. Her texts were getting angrier now. Where was he? Why wasn't he answering? The man who was always on his phone, always checking social media, always connected, had suddenly gone completely dark. 25 minutes. That's all it was. But in those 25 minutes, Gracie called Andre more than 12 times. 12 calls. Not a single one answered. At some point during this barrage of calls, one voicemail was recorded. When investigators later analyzed it, they found something chilling. 3 seconds of absolute silence. Not background noise, not muffled sounds. Complete, total silence. What was happening during those 3 seconds? What was Andre doing that he couldn't speak, couldn't even breathe loudly enough to be heard? The prosecution would later argue that during those 25 minutes, Andre was at his mother's house in Bicton, that those 25 minutes of silence were the window in which Colleen Rebello died. After 11:35, Andre became reachable again. His phone was no longer on silent. The messages started being read. Life, at least for Andre, seemed to return to normal. But inside the house in Bicton, a shower had been turned on. Water was running over a body that would not be discovered for hours. The staging had begun. 2 o'clock. Fabian waited outside his workplace for his mother to pick him up, just like she did every single day. But today, her car didn't appear. He checked his watch. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. He called her phone. No answer. He called again. Voicemail. His heart began to pound. This wasn't like her. This wasn't like her at all. His mother never missed a pickup. Never. Something was terribly, horribly wrong. Unable to wait any longer, Fabian started walking home. With each step, his anxiety grew. With each unanswered call, his fear deepened. When he finally reached the house, he heard something that made his blood run cold. The sound of running water. The shower. It had been running for hours. He called out for his mother. No response. Just the water, running and running. He made his way to the bathroom and found what no child should ever have to see. His mother, Colleen, slumped on her knees beneath the shower. Motionless. Gone. Fabian pulled her out, called emergency services, and desperately attempted CPR, but it was too late. It had been too late since those 25 minutes of silence that morning. And Andre? When he came home that evening to Gracie, she noticed nothing unusual about him. Nothing at all. He seemed perfectly ordinary, perfectly normal. The same Andre as always. For a man whose mother had just been found dead, whose brother had just experienced the worst moment of his life, Andre Rebello showed no signs of grief, shock, or distress. It was, perhaps, the most convincing performance of his life, better than any Instagram post, better than any carefully curated photo. The mask didn't slip for even a second. When police first arrived at the Bicton home, they found no signs of forced entry, no evidence of a struggle, nothing that immediately screamed foul play. The house was quiet except for that shower, still running after all those hours. Colleen's death was initially treated as unexpected, but not necessarily suspicious. These things happen sometimes. Middle-aged people die suddenly of natural causes, heart attacks, strokes. The exact cause of death couldn't be determined, though investigators noted that asphyxiation could not be ruled out. The case might have been filed away as an unsolved mystery, another unexplained death that would never have answers, if not for one crucial mistake Andre made. Actually, it wasn't a mistake at all. It was greed. Pure, undisguised greed. Just 3 days after his mother died, while Fabian was still in shock, while the family was still processing their grief, Andre started calling insurance companies. He wanted to know when he could collect on those policies. $1.15 million. He needed that money. His debts weren't going to wait. His fake lifestyle needed funding. An insurance company employee found this suspicious enough to contact police. A son taking out over $1 million in insurance on his mother, making himself the sole beneficiary, and then his mother dying within a week? And now he's calling about the payout just 3 days later? That's when the unexpected death became a murder investigation. Over the next 2 years, investigators peeled back the layers of Andre's carefully constructed life. They discovered the debt. They found the $22 crypto profits. They traced the insurance policies taken out just 7 days before Colleen's death. They analyzed phone records and found those 25 minutes of silence. And they uncovered something else. After his mother's death, Andre had embarked on a campaign of fraud and forgery to support his insurance claims. He forged his mother's will. He forged coroner's court records. He created fake medical documents. As prosecutor Brett Tucker would later say, every time Andre encountered a problem, he solved it with a forged document, just like he solved every problem in his life, with lies, with fakery, with illusion. In November 2022, more than 2 years after Colleen's death, Andre Rebello was arrested and charged with murder. He was also charged with 4 counts of fraud, to which he pleaded guilty. The Instagram influencer boyfriend, the crypto investor, the man with the perfect life, was revealed to be exactly what prosecutors said he was: a desperate fraud who killed his own mother for money. Andre Rebello's murder trial began in 2024. For the first time, the real Andre was put on display for the world to see. No filters, no careful curation, no Instagram angles. Just the ugly truth. Prosecutor Brett Tucker laid out the case methodically. The motive: $1.15 million in insurance money to pay off debts and fund a fake lifestyle. The opportunity: those 25 minutes of silence when Andre couldn't be reached. The aftermath: the eager calls to insurance companies, the forgeries, the lies upon lies upon lies. Gracie Piscopo took the stand and described those frantic calls on the morning of May 25th. More than 12 attempts to reach Andre. 25 minutes of nothing. And then, that evening, a boyfriend who seemed completely normal, completely ordinary, as if nothing had happened. Fabian Rebello gave testimony that brought the courtroom to tears. He described waiting for a mother who never came, walking home with growing dread, the sound of that shower running endlessly, finding her body, attempting CPR on the woman who had always been there for him. During his testimony, Fabian stood up and demonstrated the position in which he found his mother, slumped on her knees under the running water. The image haunted everyone who witnessed it. Andre took the stand in his own defense, and for the first time, he had to answer questions without the benefit of editing or filters. He denied killing his mother. He claimed he didn't tell police he might have been the last to see her alive because he was in shock and not thinking clearly. And then, in a moment that shocked everyone in the courtroom, he made a claim that insulted his mother's memory in the worst possible way. He suggested she might have taken her own life, and that he was only rushing the insurance claims because suicide could void the payouts. He was trying to protect the money, he claimed. The jury saw through every word. They had seen the evidence. The debt, the insurance policies, the 25 minutes of silence, the forgeries, the lies. In December 2024, after careful deliberation, they returned their verdict, guilty of murder. On April 1st, 2025, which happened to be Andre Rebello's 29th birthday, Justice Bruno Fianca delivered the sentence: life imprisonment, minimum of 25 years before any possibility of parole. The earliest Andre could possibly be released would be 2047, when he would be 51 years old. His entire adult prime gone, spent behind bars instead of behind an iPhone screen. Justice Fianca's words were devastating. He stated that while the exact method of death might never be known, the only reasonable inference was that Andre took his mother by surprise and used personal violence against her. He then staged her body under the running shower to make it look like a natural death, stripping her of her dignity even in death. The judge noted something particularly damning. Andre's social media persona, his obsession with projecting a perfect fake life, had mattered more to him than his actual relationship with his mother. The likes, the comments, the illusion of success, all of it was more important to Andre than the woman who gave him life. The judge also spoke of the ongoing damage. Andre's child would grow up knowing their father as a convicted murderer, someone who killed their own grandmother for insurance money. The ripples of this crime would extend for generations. As of January 2026, Andre's lawyers are pursuing an appeal, proposing new medical evidence, including a theory about a genetic mutation. But the conviction stands. The filters are off. The truth is out. And Andre Rebello will spend at least 25 years with nothing but his real self for company. At the beginning of this video, I asked you a question. How many of us know someone who lives a fake life on social media? Someone whose posts tell one story while their real life tells another. Think about your own feed for a moment. The friends who always seem to be on vacation. The acquaintances with the perfect relationships. The people whose lives look like magazine spreads. How many of them are real? How many are performing for the camera, hiding debts, hiding problems, hiding the truth behind filters and careful angles? After hearing about Andre Rebello, that question takes on a much darker meaning. Andre's fake life didn't just lead to debt and desperation, it led to murder. The pressure to maintain an illusion, to keep up appearances, to never let the mask slip, it consumed him completely. His mother became nothing more than a solution to a financial problem, a way to fund the illusion for a few more years, a number on an insurance policy. Those 25 minutes of silence on May 25, 2020, were the moment when Andre's two lives collided in the most horrific way possible. The Instagram Andre, with his watches and vacations and success, and the real Andre, desperate, drowning in debt, willing to do the unthinkable. In those 25 minutes, while Gracie called again and again, while voicemails recorded nothing but silence, a mother lost her life so her son could keep posting pictures of a life he never actually had. 25 minutes of silence that spoke louder than any of his Instagram posts ever did. Now that you know all the details of this disturbing case, I want to ask you, do you think 25 years is enough for someone who killed their own mother for Instagram likes and insurance money? Was justice served, or should Andre Rebello never see freedom again? And perhaps, most importantly, how well do you really know the people whose perfect lives you scroll past every day? What are they hiding behind those filters? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. And well, dear viewer, here ends today's criminal story. The story of a fake life that led to a very real murder. I would very much like to know your opinion. So I ask you to leave it in the video comments, always with respect for the victim and her family. Colleen Rebello was a real mother, a real person, who gave everything to her children and deserved so much better than to be reduced to a number on an insurance policy by her own son. We can debate about justice and punishment, but always with the respect that everyone deserves. Again, I remind you to subscribe and leave a like to let me know that my work is to your liking. Good night, until next time. He once stood on the mound in Major League Baseball stadiums, thousands of fans chanting his name. He had the money, the fame, the future every young athlete dreams of. But somewhere along the way, Daniel Serafini lost everything: his career, his fortune, his dignity. And in a desperate attempt to reclaim what he believed he deserved, he would commit an act so cold, so calculated, that it would destroy not one family, but two. This is the story of how a celebrated pitcher became a cold-blooded killer, and how a single piece of surveillance footage would eventually bring him down. But before we get to that chilling video of a hooded figure stalking toward a lakeside mansion, we need to understand the man behind the mask. Because Daniel Serafini wasn't born a monster, he was made into one. And understanding how requires going back to the very beginning, to a time when the future seemed limitless and failure seemed impossible. Are you ready for the darkest stories Britain has to offer? Introducing our new book, Unreal True Crime, British edition. 35 shocking true murder cases that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Available now on Amazon in paperback and Kindle, or grab your instant PDF download from our website. Links are in the description below. Don't miss out. Get your copy today. And now, let's continue with today's case. Born in San Francisco, Daniel Serafini discovered his love for baseball as a teenager. And he wasn't just good, he was exceptional. The kind of talent that scouts travel across the country to see, that coaches build entire teams around, that journalists write about in glowing profiles predicting Hall of Fame careers. By his early 20s, he had achieved what millions of young athletes only dream of: a spot in Major League Baseball, the pinnacle, the show, the place where childhood dreams become reality and bank accounts overflow with more money than most people see in a lifetime. He pitched for top-tier American teams, standing on mounds in front of screaming crowds. He crossed the Pacific to play in the prestigious Japanese Professional Baseball League, where American players are treated like royalty and paid handsomely for their talents. At 31 years old, Daniel Serafini was living the American dream in its purest, most intoxicating form. Magazine features, fat paychecks, endorsement deals, the VIP lifestyle of a professional athlete who believed with the confidence of youth that the good times would never end. But here's something you need to understand about professional sports, something they never tell you when you're signing that first contract. Careers are brutally short, and fortunes disappear faster than you'd ever think possible. The average MLB career lasts just 5.6 years. Most players are out of the game before they turn 30, with decades of life still ahead of them and skills that don't translate to normal jobs. And Daniel? He played hard, both on and off the field. As he himself admitted in interviews, he liked to gamble big. He liked to live large. He spent money like it would never stop flowing. So, what happens when a man who's had everything suddenly has nothing? What happens when the cheering stops, when the contracts dry up, when the phone stops ringing, and when the bills keep piling higher and higher? That's where our story truly begins. And trust me, it gets much darker from here. In 2007, Daniel's world collapsed like a house of cards in a hurricane. He tested positive for performance-enhancing drugs during a routine screening. He claimed Japanese doctors had recommended the substance for legitimate medical purposes, but Major League Baseball didn't care about explanations. Rules were rules. The league suspended him for 50 games, and just like that, the Golden Boy became damaged goods. Teams that once fought to sign him now wouldn't return his phone calls. His reputation was destroyed overnight. What followed was a downward spiral that would have broken most men completely. Minor league teams where the pay was a fraction of what he'd known, and the stadiums were half empty. Failed investments that consumed whatever savings remained. A bar business he'd poured his money into that hemorrhaged cash month after month until there was nothing left to lose. And debt. Mountains and mountains of debt that eventually climbed to a staggering $14 million. Let that number sink in for a moment. $14 million in the red. Can you even imagine the pressure of that weight pressing down on you every single day? The constant phone calls from creditors, the legal threats piling up in your mailbox, the shame of having fallen so far from where you once stood. His own parents, who had once watched their son with such pride from the stadium stands, mortgaged their family home to give him $240,000. It wasn't enough. Nothing was ever enough. The hole was simply too deep, and Daniel kept digging deeper with every failed scheme and bad investment. His first marriage crumbled under the crushing financial pressure. How could any relationship survive when every conversation eventually turned to money, to debt, to desperation? Divorced and broken, Daniel moved to Nevada, a shell of the man he used to be. The stadiums were gone. The cheering crowds were gone. The future he'd envisioned had evaporated like morning dew. But then, something unexpected happened. Something that seemed at first like salvation, but would eventually reveal itself to be the first step toward murder. A mutual friend gave him a phone number, just 10 digits that would change the course of multiple lives forever. The number belonged to Erin Spoor, a young woman Daniel had met years earlier when she worked as a horse trainer for his family. She was 19 when they first crossed paths, passionate about equestrian sports and still finding her way in the world. She was also the daughter of wealthy California real estate investors Robert Gary Spoor and Wendy Wood. Now, with Daniel newly single and desperate for a fresh start, he made the call that would change everything. Erin agreed to fly from California to Nevada for a date. The romance that followed was intense and immediate, like a fire that consumes everything in its path. Within months, they were inseparable. In 2011, they exchanged vows on a Hawaiian beach as the sun set over the Pacific, and then settled into a massive 5-bedroom property in Reno, valued at $1.1 million. From the outside, it looked like Daniel had somehow landed on his feet against all odds. A beautiful wife from a good family, a stunning home in an upscale neighborhood, a chance to rebuild, to reinvent himself, to leave the failures behind. But here's where you need to pay very close attention, because this is where the cracks in the foundation began to show. This is where the seeds of everything that would come later were planted. Aaron came from money, serious money, old money built over decades of smart decisions and careful investments. Her parents, Gary and Wendy, had constructed a fortune through real estate that most people can only dream about. They had lived abroad in Afghanistan and Hong Kong during the 1970s and 1980s, adventurous spirits who saw the world and invested wisely along the way. They owned multiple properties, including a breathtaking lakeside mansion in the Homewood area of Lake Tahoe, worth around $5 million. Their total estate would eventually be valued at over $23 million. And Daniel? Daniel brought nothing to the marriage but debt, shame, and a desperate, burning hunger for the lifestyle he'd lost. Do you see where this is going? Can you feel the imbalance, the dependency, the simmering resentment that would inevitably follow? From the very first meeting, Daniel's relationship with his new in-laws was tense enough to cut with a knife. Gary and Wendy Spoor were not thrilled, to put it mildly, that their daughter had dropped out of dental school after meeting this washed-up baseball player with a mountain of debt and a history of bad decisions. They had paid for that education. They had invested in their daughter's future. And now she was throwing it all away for a man who couldn't even support himself. The Spoors even threatened to sue Daniel for the tuition money they'd already paid. Imagine those early family dinners. The forced smiles across the table, the uncomfortable silences that stretched on too long, the elephant in the room that everyone could see but nobody would name. Eventually, the initial anger subsided into an uneasy truce. After all, Aaron seemed happy. She and Daniel had 2 children together, a boy in 2017 and another in 2020. She ran an equestrian center at their Reno property, pursuing her passion for horses. Daniel found work as an equipment operator at a remote Nevada gold mine, a far cry from the bright lights of professional baseball, but at least it was honest work. But beneath the surface of this seemingly normal family life, resentment was building like pressure in a sealed container, ready to explode at any moment. Daniel had become completely dependent on his in-laws' generosity for everything that mattered. Gary and Wendy paid for housing. They covered childcare expenses. They wrote check after check after check to keep Daniel and Aaron's comfortable lifestyle afloat while their own son-in-law failed to provide. And here's the detail that prosecutors would later seize upon, the clause that would become central to understanding the motive for murder. There was a prenuptial agreement, a document signed before the wedding that clearly stated if Daniel and Aaron ever divorced, he would receive absolutely nothing from the Spoor family estate. Not a single cent. Zero. Everything would stay with Aaron and her family. Think about that for a long moment. Really let it sink in. A man who once had millions, who once had everything, now completely dependent on people who didn't particularly like him, who looked down on him, who reminded him with every generous check exactly how far he had fallen. And if the marriage ended, he'd be right back where he started. Broke. Alone. A complete failure. Meanwhile, arguments about money became a constant background noise in both families' lives. Heated discussions about Daniel's terrible investments that kept losing money. Screaming matches about politics and lifestyle choices. Bitter disputes about a $1.3 million renovation project for the Tahoe house that Gary and Wendy wanted completed their way. The checks kept coming, and so did the resentment. And somewhere in the darkest corners of Daniel Serafini's mind, a solution began to take shape. A permanent solution to all his problems. But what no one knew was that Daniel wasn't alone in his scheming. there was someone else involved, someone disturbingly close to the family, someone who would eventually become the key to unraveling everything. Her name was Samantha Scott. She was Aaron's close friend, practically family at this point, and she worked as the nanny for Daniel and Aaron's two young children. She was in the house constantly, day after day. She knew the family's routines, their schedules, their secrets, their vulnerabilities. And at some point, she became something much more to Daniel than just the hired help. You see, Daniel and Aaron had entered into what's called an open marriage, a non-traditional arrangement where both partners are allowed to pursue romantic relationships outside the marriage with each other's knowledge. A strange choice, perhaps, but one that seemed to work for them, or at least, that's how they described it to others. And within that arrangement, Daniel and Samantha began a relationship that would ultimately lead straight to murder. What kind of hold did Daniel have over Samantha? What promises did he whisper in her ear? What glittering future did she believe they would share together once the obstacles were removed? Did she know when she agreed to help him exactly what she was agreeing to? Or did she only understand the full horror of the plan when it was too late to back out? These are questions worth holding in your mind as we move toward the darkest chapter of this story. It was a Saturday, early June in California, warm and sunny with crystal blue skies stretching from horizon to horizon, the kind of perfect day that makes you feel like nothing bad could ever happen, like the world is fundamentally good and safe and beautiful. Erin loaded her two children, ages 3 years and 8 months, into the family truck and drove the hour-plus journey to visit her parents at the Lake Tahoe house. When they arrived at the stunning lakeside property, Gary and Wendy were overjoyed to see their grandchildren. There's something about grandchildren that can heal even the deepest family wounds, and since the boys had been born, the relationship between Wendy and Erin had improved dramatically. The family spent a glorious afternoon on the water. Gary took them sailing on the lake, the children laughing and splashing as the boat cut through the gentle waves. The sun warmed their faces. The old tension seemed to be fading under the warmth of the California sun. 3 generations together, making memories that would last a lifetime. Or so they thought. That afternoon, Wendy wrote Erin a check for $90,000, just another in the endless series of financial lifelines thrown to keep her daughter and son-in-law afloat. Only a week earlier, they had given Daniel $70,000 directly. The generosity never stopped, even as the resentment it created continued to grow on the receiving end. As the sun began to set over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and gold, Robert went to the kitchen to cook dinner for everyone. It was peaceful. It was perfect. It was exactly the kind of evening you dream about when you imagine your golden years surrounded by family. At 7:45 p.m., Erin kissed her parents goodbye, loaded the kids back into her truck, and headed home to Nevada. The headlights disappeared down the winding mountain road. But here's what no one inside that beautiful lakeside home knew. They were not alone. They hadn't been alone all day. And the nightmare was just minutes away from beginning. Earlier that day, while the Spohr family was out on the lake enjoying their perfect afternoon, surveillance cameras throughout the neighborhood captured something deeply disturbing. A figure dressed in dark clothing, face completely hidden beneath a hood and white mask, backpack strapped firmly to his shoulders, walking slowly and deliberately toward the Spohr residence. This wasn't random. This wasn't spontaneous. This wasn't a crime of opportunity or passion. This was a predator who had studied his prey carefully for a long time. He knew the house intimately, every entrance and exit, every blind spot. He knew the layout, where the bedrooms were, where the family gathered in the evenings. He knew exactly when they would return from the lake and, more importantly, exactly when Aaron would leave with the children. And so he waited, hidden somewhere inside or near the property, patient as a spider, sitting motionless in its web, hour after hour after hour, calculating, ready, listening to the sounds of the happy family just feet away. The family came home from the lake. They didn't notice anything wrong. How could they? Everything seemed normal. They cooked, they talked, they laughed about the day on the water. They wrote checks and discussed grandchildren and made plans for the future. And when Aaron's truck disappeared down the winding road toward Nevada, carrying the children away from what was about to happen, the hooded figure made his move. What happened next took less than 2 minutes from start to finish, but those 120 seconds would destroy lives and haunt survivors for years to come. Gary Spoor was 70 years old, a man who had lived a full, adventurous life, a successful businessman who loved the ocean and sailing, who had planned scuba diving trips for his upcoming birthday, who adored his grandchildren and was looking forward to watching them grow up. He never saw his killer coming. The intruder approached from behind, completely silent, and fired. A single shot to the head. Gary collapsed near the fireplace without ever knowing who had ended his life or why. Wendy barely had time to process the horror unfolding in front of her before the attacker turned toward her. She was 68 years old, a vibrant woman who had dedicated herself to helping foreign seasonal workers at local ski resorts find housing, a good person who gave back to her community. She raised her hands instinctively, desperately trying to protect herself from the nightmare that had invaded her home. It wasn't enough. 2 shots struck her head. Another tore through her hand. The weapon was a .22 caliber pistol fitted with a homemade silencer, a plastic tube crudely designed to muffle the sound. It worked well enough. Neighbors heard something strange, a dull thud that didn't quite sound right, but nothing that made them think of gunfire, nothing that made them reach for their phones to call the police. The attacker slipped out as quietly as he had entered, disappearing into the darkness. Gary Spoor, beloved husband, father, and grandfather, was dead. Wendy Wood, survivor of countless adventures across multiple continents, lay bleeding on the bathroom floor, clinging to life by the thinnest of threads. And here's the detail that still haunts everyone who knows this case. It was Wendy's dog who saved her life. The family pet found her and licked her face vigorously, desperately, until she regained enough consciousness to reach for her phone. With 2 bullets in her head, somehow, impossibly, through sheer willpower, she managed to dial 911. But she couldn't speak. The operator on the other end heard only gasping, labored breathing, and then silence. When paramedics finally arrived, they found a scene that defied any logical explanation. A wealthy couple attacked in their own home, expensive jewelry completely untouched, including a Rolex still strapped to Gary's wrist and a diamond bracelet still glittering on Wendy's arm. No sign of forced entry anywhere. Nothing stolen. This wasn't a robbery gone wrong. This wasn't a random act of violence. This was a cold, premeditated execution. But by whom? And why? The peaceful Lake Tahoe community was shattered by the news. Local police hadn't investigated a murder in over 20 years. This kind of violence simply didn't happen here, in this paradise of million-dollar vacation homes and weekend boaters. Wendy survived the attack, but the road to recovery was almost impossibly brutal. 2 bullets to the head had left her with damage that would take years to overcome. She had to relearn how to walk, how to talk, how to eat. Basic functions that most of us take for granted became monumental daily challenges. And the cruelest part of all? She couldn't remember the attack. The The trauma had erased those moments from her memory entirely. She couldn't identify her attacker because she had no memory of being attacked. The one witness who might have solved everything was trapped behind a wall of amnesia. Investigators had the surveillance footage of the hooded figure, but the mask and hood made identification impossible. They canvassed the neighborhood. They interviewed everyone connected to the family. Nothing. Adrienne, the younger Spoor daughter, became the public face of the desperate search for justice. She held emotional press conferences, begging for anyone with information to come forward. She offered a $150,000 reward. Her sister Erin and brother-in-law Daniel? They were curiously absent from these public appeals. Detectives noticed something else. Daniel's cell phone, which normally generated hundreds of messages daily, had been completely turned off during the exact window of the attack. Coincidence? They didn't think so. But they couldn't prove anything. Yet. In February 2022, the case was provisionally closed. But the story was far from over. In 2023, investigators caught a break that would blow everything open. It came from motel surveillance cameras. Police discovered footage showing Daniel and Samantha checking into a Nevada motel the night before the murder. They were captured together, entering and leaving, a digital record that couldn't be explained away. Daniel's alibi began to crumble. Meanwhile, Wendy was destroyed emotionally. She suspected her own son-in-law. Worse, she harbored the agonizing suspicion that her own daughter might have been involved. The weight became too much. On March 9, 2023, Wendy Wood took her own life. She was 70 years old. But before she died, she disinherited Erin, leaving her only half of the lake house. Even in death, Wendy was pointing a finger at her own family. On October 20, 2023, Daniel Serafini and Samantha Scott were arrested in Nevada. Daniel, the former MLB star, was found living part-time in a trailer. The fall from grace was complete. Both were charged with Gary's murder and Wendy's attempted murder. Facing life in prison, Samantha's loyalty finally cracked. On February 6, 2025, she pleaded guilty and agreed to testify against Daniel. Her testimony was devastating. She described driving Daniel to Lake Tahoe, watching him test his homemade silencer, dropping him near the house and waiting for hours, picking him up after the attack, helping dispose of evidence during the drive back. They'd even exchanged love letters in prison, where he fantasized about the life they'd build once free. The 6-week trial exposed Daniel completely. Prosecutors presented furious emails to his father-in-law, described by the judge as verbally violent. Testimony that Daniel had offered $20,000 to have Gary and Wendy killed the year he married Erin, a mine foreman who heard him say he wanted to kill his in-laws. That $70,000 check Wendy gave Daniel weeks before the attack? He used it to buy his dream car. Even Daniel's own brother admitted the hooded figure looked like Daniel. On July 14, 2025, the jury found Daniel Serafini guilty of first-degree murder, attempted murder, and first-degree burglary. Special circumstances of lying in wait and felony murder were found true. Daniel awaits sentencing, postponed to February 20, 2026. Erin filed for divorce 1 week after the verdict. The two sisters are locked in civil litigation over their parents' estate. Robert Gary Spoor was adventurous, generous, and loved life. Wendy Wood survived the unsurvivable, only to succumb to grief. And Daniel Serafini went from packed stadiums to prison. The surveillance footage of that hooded figure remains one of Lake Tahoe's most chilling images, a reminder that sometimes the greatest danger doesn't come from strangers. Sometimes the monster is already inside your home. What do you think? Did Erin know? What sentence does Daniel deserve? Let us know in the comments. On August 24th, 2011, in Jonesboro, Arkansas, a man returned home after having lunch with his wife. He was carrying ice cream for his kids. He set it down on the kitchen counter. He never got to give it to them. Minutes later, Mark Despain lay dead on the floor of his own kitchen, 2 gunshots to the back, the ice cream slowly melting while his life slipped away. But the most disturbing part of this case isn't how Mark died, it's who killed him. The people responsible weren't strangers. They were the people who slept under his roof, who shared his table, who he had helped prosper for years. This is the story of how a seemingly perfect family hid secrets that would end in murder. A story of ambition, betrayal, and a conspiracy involving his wife, his father-in-law, and a hitman hired for just a few $1,000s. Are you ready for the darkest stories Britain has to offer? Introducing our new book, Unreal True Crime, British edition. 35 shocking true murder cases that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Available now on Amazon in paperback and Kindle, or grab your instant PDF download from our website. Links are in the description below. Don't miss out. Get your copy today. And now, let's continue with today's case. Mark Evan Despain was born in 1977 in Jonesboro, Arkansas, a quiet city of about 70,000 people in the northeastern corner of the state. It's the kind of place where everyone knows everyone and where your reputation follows you everywhere. Mark grew up as an active young man, playing football at Nettleton High School, where he graduated with the class of 1995. He was the kind of guy who lit up a room when he walked in. Mark loved the outdoors. He enjoyed hunting trips with friends, spending weekends at the beach, and had developed a love for scuba diving. He was a devoted sports fan and a loyal supporter of the Valley View Blazers. He was a member of Central Baptist Church, deeply connected to his faith and community. According to everyone who knew him, Mark Despain was a dedicated family man who put his loved ones first. Mark met Michelle Kelly when they were both teenagers. Michelle was a year younger and already had a daughter from a previous relationship, a little girl named Brooke. When Michelle became pregnant with Mark's child, both families got involved. The message was clear: you marry her. It was 1996. Mark was 19 years old. Michelle was 18. 2 teenagers thrust into adult responsibilities before either was truly ready. This marriage wasn't born from romance. It was born from obligation. A shotgun wedding. When a relationship begins under external pressure rather than free choice, it sometimes plants seeds of resentment that take years to manifest. I'm not saying this justifies anything that came later. Nothing could justify what happened to Mark, but it's a pattern we see repeatedly in family crime cases. Despite the circumstances, Mark took his responsibilities seriously. He didn't just marry Michelle. He fully embraced her daughter Brooke as his own, never making any distinction between her and his biological children. Over time, Mark and Michelle had two more sons, Zach and Blake. Mark learned the real estate business by working alongside his parents, Jack and Tana Despain. He started with nothing, no inheritance, no trust fund. Everything Mark had, he built with hard work. Eventually, he founded his own property appraisal and investment company, which he operated from his home at 4320 Jenny Lane. Michelle found work at a local bank and eventually took over the bookkeeping for the family business. She became a key figure in managing the finances. From the outside, the Despains were the picture of the American dream. A beautiful house in a quiet neighborhood, 3 children, a thriving family business, church on Sundays. The family everyone envied. But behind that perfect facade, there were cracks that no one could see. The first crack came with Carl Kelly, Michelle's father. Carl came from a humble working-class background, nothing like the financial success his daughter had married into. When he saw Mark and Michelle's growing prosperity, he saw an opportunity. Why work for strangers when you could work for family? Carl integrated himself into the family real estate business. He started managing rental properties, collecting rent from tenants, handling day-to-day issues. Over time, he gained money, influence, and power within the family structure. But along with all that, Carl also gained resentment. Mark, as the business owner, treated Carl exactly as what he was, an employee. Mark assigned tasks, expected results, maintained professional hierarchy. And Carl didn't like it. He didn't appreciate taking orders from his son-in-law, a man younger than him, a man who had gotten his teenage daughter pregnant. The friction between them grew silently over the years, like a wound that never quite heals. This dynamic is more common than people realize. When a father-in-law works for his son-in-law, the traditional family hierarchy gets inverted. The father is supposed to be the patriarch, the one who commands respect. But Carl found himself subordinate to Mark, having to follow instructions, answer to someone he might have viewed as the kid who knocked up his daughter. That shift in power can eat away at a man's soul, especially in older generations where masculine authority meant everything. The second fracture was even more destructive, the conflict with the Despain family itself. Mark initially worked closely with his parents, Jack and Tana, but as often happens when family and business get tangled together, disputes emerged, disagreements about money, control, direction. Michelle had heated confrontations with Jack, Mark's father. The tension kept escalating, and then came the nuclear bomb. Michelle accused Jack Despain, Mark's own father, of having inappropriate photographs of Brooke, her teenage daughter, on his cell phone. It was an accusation so serious it could never be taken back. Mark, faced with an impossible choice between his wife and his father, chose Michelle. He filed a formal police report against his own father. The investigation revealed the truth. The photos were selfies that Brooke herself had taken while using her grandfather's phone. There was nothing criminal, charges were never filed, but the truth didn't matter anymore. The damage was done. Mark cut off all contact with his father completely. His mother, Tana, was so devastated she temporarily left Jack. The Despain family was shattered. The two patriarchs, Jack Despain and Carl Kelly, now hated each other with an intensity that would explode publicly on the day of Mark's murder. I can't help but wonder whether this accusation was deliberately calculated. Investigators later suggested it may have been a strategy to isolate Mark from his family and consolidate control over the finances. Think about it. If Michelle wanted complete control over Mark and his money, what better way than destroying his relationship with the only people who might see through her? If true, it worked perfectly. Mark lost his parents, his support network, the people who might have noticed something was wrong. He became completely dependent on Michelle and Carl, the very people who would plan his death. It's a textbook manipulation tactic. Isolate the victim, cut them off from everyone who loves them, make them depend on you alone. While Mark worked tirelessly day after day to support his family, Michelle was living a completely different life, one he knew absolutely nothing about. Although the public image was one of prosperity and success, the financial reality behind the scenes was disastrous. The company had accumulated over $2 million in debt. There were unpaid bills piling up, collection notices arriving in the mail, properties at serious risk of foreclosure. The business that Mark thought was thriving was actually drowning. And who handled all the books? Who was responsible for tracking every dollar coming in and going out? Michelle. Mark had no idea about the true magnitude of the financial problems because he blindly trusted his wife to manage the finances. He was out in the field, appraising properties, meeting with clients, doing the work that brought money into the business. Michelle was supposed to be taking care of where that money went. Instead, she was hiding the truth from him every single day. But the financial deception wasn't even the worst of her secrets. Michelle was having a secret affair with a co-worker from the bank, a man barely 24 years old, more than 10 years younger than her. And this wasn't just a physical relationship, some stolen moments of passion. Michelle was financially supporting him completely. She paid his rent. She bought his groceries. She covered his moving expenses whenever he needed to relocate. She was, in the language of the streets, his sugar mama, funding his entire lifestyle while her own family's finances crumbled. Where did all that money come from? The family business. The same business that was already drowning in over $2 million of debt. Every dollar Michelle spent on her young lover was a dollar stolen from her own family's future. This detail always stands out to me in cases like this, and I think it reveals something important about who Michelle really was. She wasn't just committing infidelity, she was actively draining her family's resources to fund her affair. Think about what that actually means. Mark was working hard every single day, building what he thought was a secure future for his wife and children. Meanwhile, Michelle was bleeding that future completely dry to keep a younger man comfortable. Every rent check she wrote for her lover was money that could have paid down the crushing debt. Every dinner she bought him was, in a sense, food taken from her own children's table. It reveals a level of selfishness and emotional detachment that goes far beyond simple cheating. She was actively and deliberately sabotaging her own family while maintaining the perfect appearance of a devoted wife and mother. That takes a special kind of coldness, and then came the moment that would seal Mark's fate forever. 1 week before the murder, Mark finally confronted Michelle. Maybe he had discovered something. Maybe the financial problems had become too massive to hide any longer. Maybe he simply felt in his gut that something was deeply wrong with his marriage after all these years. Whatever triggered the conversation, Mark expressed serious doubts about their relationship. He told Michelle directly that he was considering divorce. For Michelle, this was not just a marital crisis. This was a catastrophic threat to everything. Divorce meant losing her comfortable lifestyle. It meant losing her access to money, even if that money was buried in debt. It meant her affair would be exposed to everyone. Her carefully constructed double life would collapse completely. And most importantly, something she may have thought about more than anything else, divorce meant losing the life insurance payout that would come with Mark's death. According to Mark's mother, Tana, that conversation about divorce was the exact moment when Michelle decided that her husband could not be allowed to leave alive. Divorce was simply not an option. Mark had to die. Michelle and Carl moved quickly. They contacted Johnny Hubbard, a tenant who had connections to the criminal world. Hubbard contacted Terrence Odell Barker, known as Qualo, a man willing to kill for money. The price for Mark Despain's life? Between $7,000 and $10,000. The plan was simple: get Mark out of the house, let the killer inside, stage a burglary afterward. On the morning of August 24, 2011, Michelle sent a text to her father. "It has to be today." Carl responded, "Can you get him to lunch?" Michelle could, and she did. Those 5 words, "It has to be today," are the most chilling evidence in this case. Michelle woke up that morning knowing her husband would not survive the day. She probably smiled at him, maybe kissed him, all while knowing she had ordered his execution. The coldness required to do that is almost incomprehensible. August 24, 2011. A Wednesday. An ordinary summer day that would become the last day of Mark Despain's life. The morning started like any other. Mark had absolutely no idea that his wife had just texted his death sentence to her father. He had no idea that a killer was being positioned at that very moment, that a plan was already in motion, that these were his final hours on Earth. Michelle convinced Mark to go out to lunch together, just a normal married couple sharing a midday meal. Nothing suspicious about that at all. While they sat at the restaurant, making small talk and going through the motions of a normal marriage, Terrence Barker made his way to 4320 Jenny Lane. He entered the Despain home through whatever means the conspirators had arranged, and he waited for his target to return. After lunch, Michelle manufactured some excuse to leave separately. Some errand she claimed she needed to run, some task that supposedly couldn't wait. Mark, suspecting nothing, drove home alone. Somewhere along the way, he stopped and bought ice cream for his children. A simple, loving gesture. A father thinking about his kids, wanting to surprise them with something sweet when they got home from wherever they were that day. Mark walked into his kitchen, set the ice cream down on the counter, and was shot twice in the back at close range. He never saw his killer's face. He never had a chance to fight back, to run, to call for help, to do anything at all to protect himself. He died on the floor of his own home, in the kitchen where his family had shared countless meals together. While Mark's body lay there growing cold, the ice cream slowly melted on the counter above him. Time had stopped for Mark Despain, but for everyone and everything else, it kept moving forward. A short time after the murder was committed, Michelle returned home. She would later claim she had received some kind of phone call about a problem at the house, though this story never quite made sense and couldn't withstand serious scrutiny. Michelle discovered her husband's body lying on the kitchen floor. She activated the home alarm system. She called 911 in what should have been a moment of pure horror and devastation. But something was wrong from the very first moment, and trained investigators noticed immediately. The house appeared to have been ransacked by intruders. Drawers were pulled open. Items were scattered around various rooms. It had all the visual markers of a burglary gone wrong. But investigators noticed something that didn't add up. The actually valuable items hadn't been taken. Jewelry remained exactly where it had been stored. Electronics that any real burglar would have grabbed were untouched. Cash that could have been easily pocketed was still in place. The scene looked like a burglary, but it didn't feel like one. It felt staged, performed, like someone had watched too many crime shows and tried to create what they thought a burglary should look like. And Michelle's behavior at the scene raised immediate red flags for every law enforcement officer present. Her crying seemed forced, perform for the audience of first responders rather than flowing from genuine grief. Her emotional reactions were wildly inconsistent, completely calm one moment, then suddenly hysterical the next, then calm again, but never quite authentic. She seemed far more concerned about managing how she appeared to others than about her dead husband lying on the floor just feet away. Detective Vic Brooks of the Jonesboro Police Department noticed all of these inconsistencies immediately. His instincts, honed over years of investigating crimes, told him that this was not a random burglary gone tragically wrong. This was a targeted killing with a carefully staged scene designed to mislead investigators. And the person most likely behind it all was standing right there in front of him, the grieving widow herself. What happened outside the house was almost as dramatic and revealing as what had happened inside. As yellow police tape went up to secure the crime scene, the two patriarchs of the extended family came face to face on the front lawn. Carl Kelly, Michelle's father, the man who had helped orchestrate the murder, and Jack Despain, Mark's father, the man who had been falsely accused and completely cut off from his son for years, confronted each other in full view of everyone present. Carl immediately started screaming profanities at Jack, hurling accusations right there in front of investigators, uniformed officers, curious neighbors, and news cameras that had already arrived on the scene. Years of mutual hatred between these two men exploded in the most public and inappropriate moment imaginable. This confrontation on the front lawn reveals something crucial about Carl Kelly's psychology, and I think it's worth pausing to consider what it tells us. His son-in-law has just been murdered. His daughter has just discovered the body and is supposedly in shock. This should be a moment of pure horror, of grief, of trying desperately to comfort family members who are falling apart. But what does Carl do? He immediately launches an attack on Jack Despain, trying to point the finger of blame at someone else before anyone has a chance to point it at him. That's not the behavior of an innocent man who is shocked and grieving. That's the behavior of a guilty man trying to control the narrative, trying to establish an alternative suspect in everyone's mind before the investigation can even properly begin. Initially, the investigation was a maze. Carl insisted Jack must have done it. Jack told police to look at Carl and Michelle. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source: the streets. Terrence Barker couldn't keep his mouth shut. He started bragging about his involvement, what investigators call street yapping. Word got back to Detective Brooks. Witnesses also reported seeing a beaten-up blue Mercedes in the area on the day of the murder. That car was traced to Johnny Hubbard, but the most damning evidence came from technology. Police obtained phone records for Michelle and Carl. They had exchanged numerous texts leading up to the murder, many deleted the day of the killing. But deleted doesn't mean gone forever. Forensic analysts recovered the messages, including Michelle's text, "It has to be today." The conspiracy chain became clear. Michelle was the mastermind. Carl was the organizer. Hubbard was the connector. Barker was the trigger man. One by one, they began to fall. Terrence Barker pleaded guilty to first-degree murder and received 35 years. Carl Kelly also pleaded guilty to first-degree murder. He received 35 years and later died in prison of congestive heart failure. Johnny Hubbard pleaded guilty to hindering apprehension plus probation revocation. And then there was Michelle. Initially, she faced capital murder charges. Prosecutors sought the death penalty. But complications emerged: evidentiary issues, reliance on uncertain testimony. In 2013, after consulting with Mark's parents, prosecutors announced they would not pursue the death penalty. In 2014, Michelle pleaded guilty to 3 counts of hindering apprehension and prosecution. The capital murder charges were dropped. Her sentence? 30 years, with parole eligibility after just 5 years. According to reports, Michelle was paroled in September 2019, barely 5 years after her sentencing. The life insurance money she sought after Mark's death became the subject of civil litigation. Michelle invoked her Fifth Amendment rights, refusing to testify. Today, Michelle has disappeared from public life. Mark Despain left behind 3 children who lost their father at the hands of their own mother and grandfather. Zach, Blake, and Brooke were forced to confront an unimaginable reality. Jack and Tana Despain lost their son after years of estrangement caused by false accusations. They never got to repair the relationship. The case was featured on Dateline in an episode titled The Root of All Evil and on Oxygen Snapped. Detective Vic Brooks received recognition for his work. His early instincts about the staged burglary ultimately brought the conspirators to justice. What haunts me most about this case isn't the murder, it's everything that led to it. Mark didn't die because of random violence. He died because he was systematically isolated from everyone who might have protected him. First, the false accusation against his father destroyed his relationship with his parents. Then, his trust in Michelle gave her control over finances he never knew were collapsing. Finally, when he considered divorce, that consideration signed his death warrant. Every protection Mark should have had was stripped away by the very people who would kill him. And perhaps the cruelest irony, Mark accepted Brooke as his own daughter, loved her unconditionally, and her mother used an accusation about that same girl to destroy Mark's relationship with his parents, isolating him from everyone who might have seen the danger coming. Mark's last act was buying ice cream for his kids. He walked into his home thinking about making them happy. Instead, he walked into an ambush orchestrated by the woman he'd loved since he was a teenager. The ice cream melted. Mark died. And Michelle walked out of prison 5 years later. Some crimes can never truly be paid for. Some justice is never complete. Mark Despain was not killed by a stranger. He was eliminated by the woman he met as a teenager, the family he helped prosper, and the people he trusted most. His death was not a crime of passion. It was a decision made with coldness, patience, and calculation. And for that, a man who loved football, hunting, scuba diving, and his children. A man who worked hard to build a life from nothing. A man who walked into his kitchen carrying ice cream, paid the ultimate price. If you found this story meaningful, please subscribe and share your thoughts in the comments. Until next time.